Lorraine Hansberry grew up in a time where it was not only a time of racial inequality, but also gender inequality. It was very hard for an African American woman to be successful. When she grew up in a family as the youngest of 4 children to 2 parents. Her father was a real estate broker, and her mother was a school teacher. So for the time, she came from a very wealthy African American family. They were so financially stable that her father was able to buy a fairly nice house in a part of Chicago where it was predominantly white, and it was actually among homeowners. They believed they wanted to just keep the entire neighborhood white. So when the Hansberrys attempted to buy a house in the area, there was a giant uproar, so much in fact that they tried to prevent Mr. Hansberry from buying that house. They were very strong-willed, and they decided they were going to fight it, and they were going to try and get that house. It became such a big legal issue that their case made it all the way to the Supreme Court. This case name was Hansberry versus Lee, and they did end up winning the court case. So they did buy the house, and they lived in that part of town, or was predominantly white. However, their problems were not solved because they won that case. There was constant acts of terrible racism. For example, people would throw bricks through their window. In fact, one brick nearly hit a young Lorraine Hansberry in the head, and it probably would have killed her. However, they did grow up, but it just shows how a strong ideal of their family was civil rights and standing up and making sure that they're increasing the opportunities for African Americans. The family was very prominent in the civil rights movement, so they were connected with many other prominent civil rights movement figures at that time. For example, W. E. Du Bois and Paul Robertson were great family friends. So Lorraine Hansberry grew up with them coming to her house and just growing relationships with them. Because Lorraine Hansberry grew up in this family, she also had a strong ideal of civil rights. And because her parents were so strong and such big members in the Chicago Republican Party, she also had an interest in politics. And she also had an interest in arts, because that was also a big ideal instilled in her from a young age. When she did initially go off to college, she went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. There she stayed, and even at her university, she showed her civil rights ideals. One example is when she initially came, she was in a dormitory that was segregated, and she integrated that dormitory so not only white students could stay there, but also African American students. An example from her young age, her interest in politics was she worked on the campaign of Henry A. Wallace in 1948. This is actually against her parents' wishes, so it just shows that she has a strong will. Lorraine Hansberry also continued her education because of her interest in the arts. She went to Guadalajara, Mexico, and studied painting for a year. So that just shows how she's very well rounded and how she has interest in many things, so civil rights, politics, and arts. And she eventually did move to New York. There she attended the New School of New York. While in New York, she worked for a Pan-Africanist newspaper called the Freedom Paper, which was published by one of her family friends, Paul Robertson, and W. E. Du Bois also worked at this new paper. So she was a lot of prominent figures at that time. While there, when she initially started working, she was only a secretary, but she gradually worked up and became an author for articles. She dealt primarily with issues that deal with civil rights and global issues. She particularly took an interest in the civil rights movements that were going on around the globe, and she was particularly interested in one, which was the female movement for more rights for females in Egypt. She ended up marrying Robert Nermanoff later in life, and he became very successful when he wrote his song Cindy Oh Cindy. His success allowed Lorraine Hansberry to write creatively full-time. Her biggest success was her story A Raisin in the Sun, which is inspired by Langston Hughes' poem about a dream deferred. The quote that she took for it that inspired with, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun?" This play was her most successful, and it got written to a play on Broadway. And Lorraine Hansberry at 29 became the only African American female to ever have a play shown on Broadway. She was also the fifth woman to ever receive the Best Play Award from the New York Circle of Dramatic Critics. Lorraine Hansberry sadly did not have very many successes. The Raisin in the Sun was her largest success. She even tried to have it written as a screenplay, and she did 2 different versions of the screenplay, and she approached Columbia Records, who turned it down because it was too controversial for the time. Miss Hansberry eventually split from her husband, Robert Nermanoff, and she eventually joined the Daughters of Bacillus, where she wrote a couple of letters. One was called The Ladder, which dealt with feminism and homophobia. Unfortunately, Miss Hansberry died very young of pancreatic cancer when she was 34 years old. But she left a legacy of civil rights and freedom, and that even though there's stereotypes because she was a woman and African American, it does not hinder you from being successful.